Hi, we're going to just briefly talk about scope of an investigative detention. If you've already read the Terry versus Ohio case, you should be familiar with scope of an investigative detention, but it's important to understand scope because you will hear about it in investigative detentions, and we'll also talk about it when we look at search and seizure, most specifically search warrant requirement. But as it applies to investigative detention, remember two things: timing and the purpose for the stop. Timing is important because if there is an excessive amount of time that is used where the officer is not diligently pursuing the investigative reason for the stop, courts will hold that the individual was under arrest and any evidence that was seized outside of the scope of the stop will be suppressed. Second important topic when it comes to scope is what is the purpose for the stop? Once again, if the purpose for the stop is exceeded, any evidence seized as a result of that arrest will be suppressed. An example of scope regarding the investigative detention would be considering the Terry versus Ohio case. As you're familiar, Officer McFadden stopped the individuals because they were acting suspiciously out in front of a jewelry store, and the officer, based on his training and experience, believed that they were casing the store for the robbery. But let's say that during the course of his investigation, he interviewed one of the persons, and the person indicated that, yes, I'm waiting out in front of the store. I have a friend of mine in the store shopping. The officer might call for backup and detain that person, and then go into the store to try to determine whether or not there was somebody outside waiting for a shopper. So the purpose of the stop must be followed by the officer, and what the purpose of that stop is for must be related to what the officer is doing to further his or her investigation. A second example of scope and as it applies to the purpose of the stop. Let's say an individual is stopped for speeding. The officer approaches the driver, obtains the driver's registration, license, and goes back to the officer's car to write out the ticket for speeding. Once the officer is done writing out the ticket, he returns or she returns to the driver's side of the car. The officer, without any suspicion that there may be drugs related inside the car, asked the driver if he or she would consent to a search of the motor vehicle for drugs. If the person does not give consent, the officer must issue the ticket, return the operator's driver's license and registration, and allow the driver to leave. Let's say the officer does not do that and calls for another officer to arrive with a drug sniffing dog, and the dog takes a walk around the car, and lo and behold, the dog hits indicating that there is drugs in the car. That evidence will be suppressed because the officer exceeded the scope of the stop by detaining the driver of the car until another officer arrived with a dog to sniff around the car. Once the purpose of the detention has been accomplished, the person must be released, or any evidence seized after that will be suppressed.